Jack Mitchell, when I think of people that love top 40, I think of you, but I'm thinking about music. Today, we're not talking about music. We're getting into the top 40 of horrible, horrible football losses for Nebraska as we roll on in the Groin Kick Chronicles. How are you?
Today we go to a caller from Lincoln, Nebraska, who always dreamed of being a football coach. And guess what? He did become one.
He got kicked in the pills. Speaking of kicking in the pills, let's run through these games before we discuss them more in depth. Of course, people just heard the highlights and the rankings, but a reminder, at number 40, 2017 Ohio State. At number 39, 2024 Ohio State. Number 38, 2021 Oklahoma. Number 37, 2022 Oklahoma. Number 36, 2015 Northwestern. Number 35, 2020 Iowa. Number 34, 2017 Penn State. Number 33, 2024 UCLA. Number 32, 2016 Iowa, and rounding out, or I guess beginning this stretch as we go in reverse order, number 31, 2021 Wisconsin. You will see here, Jack, that teams kind of get chunked together.
Yeah.
We just talked at the end of last episode about 2019 Ohio State. That was actually a selection of 3 games featuring the Buckeyes. That game tied for 40th with 2017 Ohio State, and then last year's Ohio State game at 39. Where shall we begin as we get closer and closer to the top 30?
I'm not sure. This is a bizarre group.
It's a hodgepodge group,
It is
isn't
a
it?
bizarre group of games. You've got, like you said, the runs, 2 games together, the same opponent that I would never put together on this list. You've got some that I thought we would have mentioned at the very beginning of this whole series that we're just mentioning now in the top 40.
Yeah.
Is that good? Am I good at that or not?
I don't know.
No?
You tell
Okay.
me. You know what's interesting is, like, on our next episode, as we get into the top 30, like, we're going to start getting into real memorable gut punch type losses that are kind of the precursor, right? Like, this is interesting because you'll have games that were close. 2021 Wisconsin, that was a close game. Last year's UCLA game, that was a close game. 2020 Iowa being only at 35 in a game that went down to the wire and Nebraska had the football with a chance to win with a couple of minutes left. Like, that is in here. 2021 Oklahoma, but it also then is mixed in with some nasty blowouts. The 2017 Penn State game, the 2017 Ohio State game, and then last year's Ohio State loss. You're right. Like, I think what we have had so far is this normal collection of, that was a close game, but maybe to an opponent that people don't really have a whole lot of feelings about, or that was a blowout loss. It makes sense. This is a combination of teams people hate, teams people don't really care about, I guess, and all sorts of margins of loss for the Huskers.
Yeah. I don't know. Yes, it is a bizarre group. I feel like this is the last. We'll see, because I still haven't seen, 30 on down to 1.
Yeah.
But I feel like the next group we are going to have, we've taken bits and pieces of, groin kickiness. And this one has, a couple of them, and this has a few factors. And we tried to quantify it with our formula.
Yeah.
We admit the formula is not perfect. It certainly isn't perfect.
Your words, not mine.
We admit it is not perfect.
The royal we.
And so, but I think you're going to start after this getting into a spot where you're taking huge chunks of the groin kick factors, as I described them on that podcast we did after the USC game last year, which at that point, we didn't have the formula. We talked about the formula, and we sort of kind of just went on prose instead of what consisted of a groin kick game. So, but with all that said, let's go back and talk about some of these games.
Hey, how about this real quick tease? We haven't gotten to that USC game yet. So at the very least, Jack, it is a top 30 groin kick loss.
Wow.
So I think that
I thought there was a chance. I was a little worried about that. That
it was going to be like 48.
That I had that huge screed about how it was the quintessential. It was the quintessential groin kick game, and then it would be like 58 on this whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'm actually glad to see that.
Yeah,
so.
I would say this as we now get into these one by one, and let's just start with number 40, which was in a tie. I think that we are still in the, I don't really remember a whole lot of plays from that game part of the list, which we're not going to be able to say that when we get into the top 30. Let's just start with the tie for 40. We finished up last week's episode talking about the 2019 loss to Ohio State, a blowout. I made mention to the 2017 loss to Ohio State, which was also a blowout. I mean, really two sides of the same coin in terms of a good Ohio State team coming into Lincoln. Now, the 2017 team was much worse than the 2019 team, but this is an Urban Meyer-led team still. It's his second to last year. They run Nebraska off the field, and Nebraska had no chance in this game at all.
This game should not be that high. I'm sorry.
It should be a whole lot lower, shouldn't it?
It should not be this high. I mean, this was a game you went into reluctantly. This was a game you went in. I mean, of all of the games that we talked about, I believe there weren't many games that you went into as a fan having less of an expectation that a win was going to happen. Like the pregame win expectations might be the lowest of the entire thing.
Yes. Well, I can tell you, Jack, the reason that this game is bumped up, and we've talked about this throughout this series, if you have a game where Nebraska has a 0 to 1% chance to win, or in the second half their max win percentage probability was 0 to 1%, we gave you an 8 out of 10. Jack, it was 0.1% for Nebraska in this. I mean, it was, 0.2 and 0.37 for those two stats. This game was one where Nebraska had zero chance to win the entire time it was played.
The problem with that is what happens with these games is we disconnect, right? We
Absolutely.
disconnect from them. And so you don't even build up, the definition to me of a groin kick game is that you build up some level of hope that gets smashed, right?
They could win. They could win. They could win.
Smashed. But you know what I did during this game? I was on vacation with my family. Oddly enough, we were in Holland, Michigan at a VRBO on vacation. And I spent the entire second half of this game texting with Dirk Chatlin, who was
friend of the pod.
Right. Who was, and it might have been after the game, but whatever. It can be fake for this. But I was texting with him that night. And texting him about a little project he was doing where he was talking about, some of the worst losses over the course. I believe he was talking about some of the worst losses, but it was about a retrospective about just how bad things have gotten and how this is what rock
Jack,
bottom.
It was 8 years ago.
8 years ago. They hired Bill Moose the next day.
Yes, they did. I came in and had to do a radio show as we announced that move, and we're all like, who in the world is this guy? Yeah, you're right about disconnecting, and there are a few other games on this group of teams. Let's talk about those in terms of disconnecting type games. 2022 Oklahoma.
That was the next one I was going to bring up.
That was the one that I wanted to talk about as well. That's the first game with Mickey Joseph.
Too high.
And so that one, Nebraska, remember, right down the field. Trey Palmer, touchdown. Gus Johnson. And quick aside, do you remember this was the game where Gus Johnson apparently swallowed a bug, and then Urban Meyer and Joe Klatt called the game in the second half? Do you remember that about this football game? You were probably in the building, or did you just turn it off?
No, I think I put it on a second screen and started doing something else. It was
very strange. But Nebraska goes down, they score a touchdown, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, are they actually going to do this in the first game after Scott Frost? And the answer was unequivocally no, they were not. They actually ended up firing Chinander after this performance because the defense was so bad. This was one easy to disconnect, and man, I still remember the feeling in the moment of, this is a total loss season. You fired your coach after 3 games. There are still 8 more to go after this Oklahoma loss. Is this team going to win any more games? I remember wondering if they were going to go 1-11. They won 4 that year, but I thought it was very much in play after that performance versus the Sooners.
Now, so I think that one is way too high. Now, I will give a little. So 2017 Penn State is on there too, and that's another one where you went in with incredibly low expectations. The eyes were already on the future. It was a blowout, but there was Nebraska. At least I watched the game with you. So
Wang Nachos began that night,
and I got a tiny bit of hope later as that game. Unlike any other one that we've discussed so far in this episode, there was at least a moment in the second half of that game where I got a touch of hope, which I shouldn't have had. Yes, admittedly.
Yeah.
I already can feel the look at how fast I defend myself. I can feel the tweets coming in. Jack, with that team, you thought that they might come. Shut up. Yeah, I did. That's how I watch football.
I have a video on my phone. Maybe I'll show you after this episode, and we could release it as a bonus part of this podcast where it's you just yelling, holding at the television for like 20 seconds as you wear your Thunder Collins jersey. Jack, 0.9, 0.36 in terms of second half post-game win probability, minus 143 yard disparity. That's the reason that this game was as high as it was, but you're right. 2017 Penn State, in this whole project, it's on the short list of it could be in the 65 to 70 range, and I don't think anyone would blink an eye.
I thought it would have been there, but for some reason I got a little bit of something with that game that I did. Maybe it was just because we were all together when we watched it.
Yeah, very memorable in that regard. And Jack, there's one more blowout on this list. Did you disassociate during the 2016 lost to Iowa 40-10. Nebraska went down. This game, as we talked about in the first half of this podcast, most memorable, at least to me, for the Mark Banker bloodbath practice quote. Remember, like, that was in the era, and we talked about this, Jack, a couple of episodes ago after the first loss that Mike Riley's team took to Iowa. Physicality, toughness, those are words that I think you banned your kids from using in your household because they were talked about so much. After this game, and Mark Banker has the bloodbath practice quote, like, oh my gosh, it was horrible around here.
Yeah, now this is what a blowout. This is when a blowout should be on the groin kick list.
That it should.
This game.
It's in a proper spot.
Yes, it maybe could even go higher. But this is the type of game that. And you think of when it happened in Mike Riley's career, you're still fresh off of being in the top 10, somewit fresh off of being in the top 10.
It was a month
like
previous.
a month after
and
that.
Jack, if they would have won that game, and I know, don't tweet at me now, tweet at Jack and say this to him. If they would have won that game, and if Wisconsin would have gotten upset in their last game, Nebraska actually would have won the Big Ten West. So there was
Wisconsin played Minnesota. I was getting ready. Oh my gosh!
But then Nebraska got beat by 30, and so you didn't have to care anymore. But like that was what was at stake. Even as bad as that season ended, they entered Black Friday with a chance to win the division, and that's the last time that they entered Black Friday with a chance to win their division.
Yeah.
So you think this game is in a proper spot, or you would actually think it could fit?
It's probably about. I doubt there are a lot that are way worse, but this is among the most groin kicky of the huge blowouts.
I will
in my opinion, because it wasn't at a point that was so early that you kind of expected it, right, or that so late that you had already given up all hope. Mm-hmm. It was kind of in the middle. It was kind of the mama bear. Right, of when it happened.
Well, I will say this, to tease next week's episode, and I imagine that people, if they're sickos, maybe they've been keeping track, there are just a few more blowouts, and those are going to be very, very, very memorable that we'll get to next week.
I wonder if I will have blowouts that I think are more painful than
this one?
Than this one. I don't. It's going to take something, but I can't think of them all right off the top of my head right now. So
stay tuned for next week's episode.
Let's talk about the non-blowouts on this list,
Let's just go back down to 39 as we work our way back up. 39, and that is last year's Ohio State loss, which is, Jack, this was one of those, and we've talked about them before. It's kind of that classic, why can't Nebraska fans have nice things type loss? They've been nice wins, right? They've been unable to have those super memorable wins. And for a while, this one, Ohio State's actually kind of dominating early. And that's actually why the game is as low as it is, because the post-game and the second half win probability, they're still pretty low, even though Nebraska did have a second half lead. But remember the John Hull field goal of 50-whatever yards, and then they get the turnover in the second half. They have a first and goal. Like, they have all of these moments, the Jamal Banks missed pass, and it just seemed like it was finally going to be the day. But when they took the lead late in the game, it seemed like they had wasted, not goodwill, but they should have done it earlier in the game, not as late as they did.
Yeah, and it had the weird thing about this one is I didn't feel terrible after it because
moral victory.
Yeah. Right. Or something close. I think I said something after it like, I don't believe in moral victories, but this is as close to one as you can get.
I would say, Jack, in Rule's, 13 losses so far, this is the personification. This is his best loss of any of the losses that they were the national champs.
Now, that said, this follows the script.
It very much does.
It follows the script. I mean, you think about those chances. Nebraska has the ball, right? The chance to would it be tie or take the lead at that point down at the end?
At the end, they could have taken the lead because they were down by 4, so they had to go for a touchdown.
And it was the infamous 2 screen passes.
Yes,
remember?
Yes, yeah, where they suddenly are wasting time, and then there's a not pass interference call that happens.
These are all the things I laid out in that USC podcast.
Yes.
All of the things are there.
Yeah,
but it's still one of the things. And maybe there are other moments like this for Ohio State this year where they ended up winning the national championship, but they were one play away from losing that game before any of that ever happened.
It gets down to 4th down.
It was 4th down.
And it was a super easy completion, right?
But they passed, but it was like 4th and 1, and they passed.
Yeah.
I mean, that pass is a little offline. Mm-hmm. Anything. This Ohio State team that just absolutely cruised through the playoffs, then obviously lost to Michigan, but cruised through the playoffs to the national championship. None of that happens if that pass, falls off Egbuka's hands. I think it was to Egbuka.
Yeah, it was absolutely brutal. And think about that. If Nebraska beats Ohio State, and who knows about the butterfly effect, but if they still lose to Michigan, they're not going to the playoff. And so, and they won the whole thing.
Right.
The difference is that small. And so they made a few plays late in the game in Nebraska.
They could have had a really big Holiday Bowl win, though.
Yeah.
Or something, or whatever. I don't know
with none of their players. The next on the list was 38, 2021 Oklahoma. Too low in your mind?
Yes, 100% too low in my mind.
So
the 2022 Oklahoma game is rated higher than it.
Yeah,
Josh, your formula is wrong. Your formula messed this one up.
The argument, the argument for 2021 Oklahoma being this low is, in terms of the math of how the game unfolds, it just was a game that Nebraska never really had that good of a chance to win. Because remember, Oklahoma just kind of stiff arms them the entire time in this one.
I mean, what was the final score in this game?
This was a game where they lost by, as I look at my sheet, they lost by 7 points, 23-16.
Okay, it's a one-possession game.
I know, but they were down by two scores throughout a lot.
And it's got a signature of play as you can get, which is the play of the year interception, right? By Oklahoma against
the
Adrian
one-handed,
Martinez. Yes,
where Gus Johnson
right away,
absolutely loses
you're like,
his
well,
mind.
that's probably gonna win. I don't know, people win ESPYs anymore or whatever. Like right away, or it's gonna be number one on top 10.
You're going to hate this. So there's only one category that got a 9 out of 10 in this for Oklahoma, and that was the margin of victory, because it happens in that band of by a touchdown or less. Let me ask you this, Jack, because we have not talked about this. Oklahoma shows up twice on the entire list, and we have talked about them on this very episode. Doing the work with our friends, what did you call them earlier? Nerds, the nerd friends.
Retired to the nerds with the retired to the nerdery with the nerds.
We gave Oklahoma, instead of a 5 out of 5 on the rivalry scale, a 4 out of 5 on the rivalry scale, because we say now losses to Iowa, Wisconsin, and Colorado hurt more. Your thoughts? Kind of fits, doesn't it?
Maybe a 4.5. What did you give Colorado?
We gave Colorado a 5.
But that's because of Dion. Did you give Colorado a 5 in 2018?
We gave Colorado a 5 across the board. Really? No way. You would have had them as a 4 in 2018?
In 2018, they're the same as Oklahoma.
No, I think you wanted to beat them a lot more than you wanted to beat Oklahoma, didn't you? You didn't wake up that day, that first Scott Frost game, and think, remember that tweet that Nebraska sent out with all the old highlights? I can remember you quote tweeted it.
I know. I mean, I hated Colorado, but people think Oklahoma was a rivalry based on respect, Josh. Perhaps you've heard.
Yeah, I have heard. And maybe that's why we bumped it down to a 4.
I've disagreed with it. Maybe you guys just felt the respect from, I don't know. Listen, Josh, I hate to critique all the work you did on this.
But
that 37-38 with the 2022 Oklahoma game being rated one spot out of the 2021 Oklahoma game it's a real indictment.
Yeah, well,
on this whole thing.
I apologize.
That we've spent, just weeks on.
Yeah, now you're like, you know what? I don't even want to see the top 30.
Should we just cut it, everyone?
Yep. All right, go home, everybody.
See ya. Have a great one.
Stibbs, thank you very much for all your help. We have 4 more games, Jack, to talk about on this episode. The first appearance of a team that you despise, that I think you would probably make an argument to be a 4, and that is Northwestern, the Wildcats, which we gave them a 3 rating. On the rivalry scale, 3 out of 5.
Definitely did, at least.
2015 Northwestern, I would say, of the losses that Nebraska's had, and I mean, I guess this fits because we still have many more losses to go inside of the top 30. This one, I think it's kind of in the right spot, where Nebraska loses by a score, but it was not really that close of a game throughout much of this. Northwestern kind of dominated in this game.
I mean, I remember, and I know everyone has just listened to kind of the summary of it, but
you just did too, and you don't even remember
I'm struggling to...
And you just heard it.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's probably right. It's probably right. Again, it was in that early part of a new era.
Yep.
But it's against a team that you want to... And it's close, but it's kind of not close. So
Jack,
I agree. It's about right.
There are way worse 2015 losses that are to come in the Groin Kick Chronicles. I think, if anything, the argument I would make is it's wild that Northwestern is actually above the Iowa loss that we talked about in one of our more recent episodes. Speaking of Iowa, the Hawkeyes, they have 2 appearances inside of the 40-31 band. The COVID loss in 2020, where Adrian Martinez gets sacked and fumbles towards the end of the game when Nebraska had a chance. After, I'd forgotten about this, Jack, Iowa doinks a field goal and gives Nebraska the ball close to midfield. And it's like, oh my gosh, are they going to do this?
They finally missed a field goal.
The answer was no, but they had a shot to do it late in the game.
Yeah, COVID takes away. There's always a COVID factor that takes away from
COVID tax.
the COVID tax on these, but still otherwise, that one had almost everything, right?
It really did.
I believe there was a really bad call somewhere on there, too.
Probably,
yeah.
Yeah, now one of the parts about the math that I didn't work in because it's kind of subjective is bad calls, and also I didn't want to go through the play-by-play data. We should have maybe gone to you and said, hey, did this game...
A key bad call or a key replay that goes against,
yes,
Nebraska is always a very typical thing. I mean, we can talk a little bit later at some point about some of the things that we couldn't necessarily measure, but definitely are part of this classification of games.
Yeah, certainly. 2 more games to get to, Jack. We start with 33, and that was last year's loss to UCLA, which I would say fits in kind of with the discussion that we just had about Iowa, where Nebraska loses by a score, but at one point the game is 27-7. The start of the second half was absolutely terrible with a pick six and then a long touchdown pass from the Bruins. And suddenly the game, I remember we watched it at Crossstream. We watched it at a brewery that day. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to get run off the field. And then actually the defense plays really well and the offense moves the ball, but they got into the red zone and they just were unable to finish on multiple drives. Dylan Raiola gets knocked out of the game. Remember the last drive of the game, Heinrich Harburg is out there on the field.
Yeah, and the other thing about this, remember the comments about the atmosphere? I wasn't at this game, but the comments were just like,
bad.
Wow, it's just so...
Yeah.
There's no electricity here, and there should be. Why isn't there? And those sorts of things. And
I think you and I did our post-game show that night, and you were defending Marcus Satterfield as you often were, and then he got fired the next week, or he got demoted rather. So tough look for you, Jack.
Maybe I was playing 5D chess.
Maybe you were. Maybe
I actually got him fired
by being supportive.
Maybe I was. I don't want to explain the strategy. That would give it away.
Probably for the best.
You keep thinking about that and let me know what you come up with.
Probably for the best. The last game on this episode, 2021 Wisconsin. I don't know how much you remember about this game beyond what we just played in some of the highlights, but most memorable, in my opinion, for being the first game after we learned that Scott Frost and not much of his staff, about half of his staff was going to be back. They fired a ton of coaches after the loss to Ohio State a couple of weeks prior, and on the first kickoff of the game, Wisconsin returns it for a touchdown, and it's like, oh, cool, it's going to be one of those games. Nebraska, it was such a weird year, Jack, and I just talked about it on the first half of this episode. When Nebraska's offense played well, the defense faltered. When the defense played well, the offense faltered. This was more of the former, where the offense is finally moving up and down the field. They scored 28 points on a good Wisconsin defense, but they allow 35, including that.
And this had a hallmark that shows up repeatedly a few times in this series of games, in the worst groin kick games, and that is a missed pass interference against Nebraska at the end of the game. People talk about the 2016 one.
Oh,
yes,
they do.
Rightfully so.
You talk
they
about
should.
that.
But there's another. People don't talk about this one as much. Go watch that highlight of the Hail Mary, basically the last throw, and it's some obscene pass interference that just, I guess, is okay on that play. And we'd see again down the road a few times within this list.
Speaking of down the road, Jack, I have, again, forgotten to move it closer to you. Maybe on the next episode, I'll be sure to do that. Take a look at what we'll be doing for 30 to 21. I mentioned some blowouts. I mentioned some blowouts in there, in particular numbers 27, 26, 25. Those are some ass whoopings that Nebraska took that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Okay.
We're getting there, aren't we?
Well, I see what 28. I knew that one was coming. That's
yeah.
I thought that one might get up into the top 20. Probably not top 10.
I did too, Jack.
But top 20.
Yeah.
Blowout there.
Yeah.
Let's see. 20. 26. But there's another blowout. Blowout. There's 3 blowouts in a row.
Yeah. And some memorable nighttime losses.
Whoa. 24?
Yeah, how about that? That's way lower than I was expecting as well.
I mentioned that in our intro podcast as being in my top 10.
Yes, you did. This was one of the games on your list, as we talked about.
That shocks me.
Find out next week what number 24 is. We will look at games 30 to 21. And as we've been teasing for the last 2 episodes, Jack, I would say this is the time period where we're going to start getting into the what represents the groin kick most of all. We're pretty much there. Yeah. So stay tuned for some of that hell that we'll have coming up.
Can't wait to delve in.
Yeah, next week's episode. As always, highlights, lowlights can be found at huskermax.com. Jack, I cannot wait to talk about these games with you a week from now. It's going to be so much fun.
Same here. Let's do it.